Are you tired of spending hours on end mastering mechanical skills? Do you like planning your moves ahead of time? Is chess your favorite board game? If so, the Fisher-Price My First Killer may be the one for you. Evan Chuckles MacMillan, raised in Seattle, Washington, had a great relationship with his father Archie. They would share plenty of endearing father-son moments, including ruling the working population with an iron fist, retaining high production from the coal mines by any means necessary, and hunting. Evan was loyal to both the workers, who secretly acted as the friends he was never allowed growing up, as well as his father, who served as a role model for him. Archie, knowing his son was hiding something, offered a cash prize for the workers to sell Evan out, an offer which his friends promptly took. Feeling spiteful and betrayed, Evan followed his father's blood-stained footsteps, leading 100 workers into the dark, dynamite-rigged tunnels, trapping and killing all of them on detonation. Now that we have some background information about the Trapper, let's take a look at his power. The Trapper's power is his bear trap. That's all. It may not sound complex, but it is. It may seem easy to use, but it's not. The Trapper has 8 bear traps to catch survivors in, 2 in his hand and 6 scattered across the map. Players can place, pick up, and reset traps in front of them. At any given moment, the Trapper can hold up to 2 traps, as well as seeing the aura of every trap in the trial. Armed traps have both jaws on the ground, and have a static hitbox that can be triggered by the survivors and the killer alike. Deactivated traps have both jaws together vertically and serve no purpose besides being armed or picked up. Survivors are given the option to disarm a trap when standing beside it, deactivating the trap until the Trapper resets it. When a trap is triggered by a survivor, a few things happen. If the survivor is healthy, they are instantly injured. The survivor is also put in the trapped state, and all other players, including the killer, are alerted to the survivor's exact location. Once a survivor is trapped, they can struggle for a chance at freedom, or rely on a guardian angel to save them. However, the Trapper can hit the survivor into the down state or even instantly pick them up. Now that you know the basics of the bear trap, it's time we review Evan MacMillan's teachable perks. The Trapper's teachable perks are decent overall, ranging from "why would you ever use this" to "hey, this actually helps me sometimes." Unnerving Presence, otherwise known as "I'm only using this for my adept achievement," is at best an unreliable tracking perk with tiny slowdown from survivors' missed skill checks. Besides some niche builds, I recommend players throw this one right in the dumpster in favor of most general killer perks. Brutal Strength, as implied in the name, is a perk for brutes who use their big, meaty, bulging muscles to smash wood. In all seriousness, this perk allows killers to break pallets, breakable walls, and generators 20% faster. It works as an aid when pallet loops are very large and the killer cannot score a hit, giving the survivor less time to make distance. This perk is like a hammer, not the most exciting or innovative tool, but essential for your DBD toolbox. Agitation is defined as a state of anxiety or nervous excitement according to Oxford Languages. For example, a person may be agitated before... Oh, you meant the perk. Agi causes the killer to move 18% faster when carrying a survivor, making it easier to find and get to a hook. It is important to note that the global killer movement speed while carrying a survivor is 3.68 meters per second, or 92% of a survivor's running speed. At Tier 2 and Tier 3, agitation breaks this threshold, causing the killer to move faster than survivors. This opens up the opportunity for a greedy play to down a cocky survivor while carrying their teammate. For the most part, however, Agi is only used to approach hooks faster. Brutal Strength and Agitation are members of a subset of perks that I like to call quality of life. They don't create massive gameplay shifts or game-winning moments, but they do make your games just a little bit more fluid. By this point, you know who Evan MacMillan is and how he fits into the Dead by Daylight universe. You have a basic understanding of what he does, but I hear students asking, how do we use this killer in a match? What tactics should I employ for complete and utter domination on the trial grounds? Fear not. This course is all about crushing and crumpling, pounding and destroying, juicing and milking, rolling and smoking. In the next chapters, you will learn about the Trapper's notable perks and add-ons, his various playstyles, as well as a final note from the professor. Corrupt Intervention is the single most important perk for any Trapper player to have. With this perk, the 3 generators furthest away from the killer's spawn point are blocked, meaning the survivors cannot work on them. This effect lasts until a survivor is downed or the 2-minute timer expires. Corrupt effectively splits the map into a small playable region and a dead zone where no main objectives can be completed. The Trapper can then choose to set up in the dead zone, where survivors will be forced to play eventually, or in the playable region, where his presence prevents survivors from making significant progress on unblocked generators. Corrupt Intervention is teachable from the plague. Save the Best for Last is a perk that decreases your basic attack cooldown as you attack survivors that are not your obsession. The best killers to use this perk on are ones that rely on basic attacks but have alternate ways of injuring survivors. In this case, the Trapper can avoid hitting the obsession by picking them up directly from a trap. While this is not the most reliable special attack, it is a nice bonus that boosts the potential of an already great perk. Save the Best for Last is teachable from the shape. Whispers is the first non-teachable perk to appear on this list, but that does not make it any less viable for a strong Trapper build. The perk simply lights up when a survivor is closer than 32 meters away from you in any direction. Whispers has some surprisingly complex applications, such as triangulating the exact location of a survivor based on its area of effect. On the Trapper, however, you can simply use this as a rough indicator of whether or not survivors will know you set a trap. If Whispers is off as you set it, they are more likely to be caught off guard. The 4th spot on my list of notable perks goes not to a single perk, but rather a subset that I am calling Static Hex perks. These have effects that are bound to one totem at the beginning of the match and will stay there until cleansed by a survivor. Many totem spots are wedged between 2 solid objects, allowing the killer to restrict access with just one trap. This setup means survivors will need additional time to disarm it before cleansing, which triggers a global sound notification, prompting the killer to return and rearm the trap. With hexes having some of the strongest individual effects in the game, the trapped totem gives the killer the most opportunity to get value from a perk, while minimizing the risk of losing it. This is not a definitive list of all the best perks for Trapper, but simply a few that have additional synergy with this kit beyond being generally decent killer perks. Perhaps in a future lecture I will show the class how to put together a comprehensive Trapper build. But for now, I suggest you experiment with perks and builds and see what works for you. The Trapper has a wide range of add-on options after receiving a much-needed overhaul in patch 5.3.0. Before the patch, Trapper mains had options such as bag, setting speed, setting speed, setting speed, and setting speed. The patch successfully condensed these into 1 or 2 rarities per category to make room for new options, many of which are quite fun and viable. In the past, the Trapper bag was considered a baseline add-on, since most sentient, rational, living, breathing human beings believed that one-trap Trapper was borderline unplayable. That's right, an add-onless Trapper used to only be able to carry 1 trap at a time. Nowadays, the add-on is still very good, although the jump in carrying capacity from 2 traps to 3 is not nearly as game-changing as the former jump from 1 to 2. The Honing Stone is a great add-on for generating additional pressure on the survivors when you hear a snap and a scream from across the map. If a survivor struggles free from a honing stone-inflicted trap, it will be instantly downed instead of just injured. This even more so limits a player's options once they trigger your traps, as the only way they can run away is if a teammate is nearby to help them. The trapped survivor does, however, receive an indicator that the add-on is in play, allowing smart survivors to wait in the trap instead of trying to struggle free. Despite being one of the Trapper's best add-ons before the overhaul, the current Trapper Sack is perhaps his single best add-on. The Trapper Sack is transformative, somewhat changing the way the player should use this killer. With the Trapper Sack, the player starts the match with all 8 traps in their hand, with the drawback of never being able to pick up traps. This means the killer usually cannot afford to place risky traps that may catch survivors off guard, but rather ones that block certain doorways, pallets, and vaults. While the killer cannot pick up traps, the player can still rearm them, allowing these obstructive traps to retain their value, while surprise traps become useless after one use. A good pair with the previous add-on, the iridescent stone resets one disabled trap at random every 30 seconds. The gameplay shift caused by the Trapper Sack eliminates the disarmed traps that spawn scattered across the map at the beginning of the game. One of the only drawbacks to the iridescent stone is the inconsistency of not knowing if the trap that resets will be valuable to the killer. However, by holding all traps until they are manually placed, the add-on will only reset the traps that have been deliberately put in a useful spot by the killer. While I would love to break down every single add-on in the Trapper's arsenal, I know many of you have other classes after this one, and I must respect your time as well. After the add-on pass, most of the Trapper's add-ons are formidable, and the ones that I have described are just a few highlights from my time playing the killer. The only add-on that you should avoid is the padded jaws, which remove the instant damage the bear trap deals when a survivor is caught in it. Frankly, the in-game blood point bonus is not worth it, and killers should only run this as a challenge mode after learning the ins and outs of the Trapper. As many of you have realized by now, the Trapper is a member of a small group of killers that rely on the setup playstyle. This essentially means that in order to get full value from the killer's power, they must take certain actions before chasing survivors and gaining hooks. The two most prominent setup killers are the Trapper and the Hag, with the Demogorgon, the Shape, and the Ghostface having elements of gameplay that benefit from forethought, but do not depend on it. Some keen observers may already know that the Trapper's setup phase largely entails placing traps in areas that survivors will need to run through towards the end of the game. The 3-gen strategy is basic killer knowledge, but it defines how the Trapper is played in any given scenario, and it relies on the following game knowledge. Every single game of Dead by Daylight spawns 7 generators, and the survivors power the exit gates by completing any 5 of them. If the killer is able to protect 3 generators on the map at any cost, there is no risk of losing, as the survivors will have 1 gen left by the time all other gens are powered. The general Trapper strategy entails placing most all of your traps in a small portion of the map that contains 3 or 4 generators. In a typical match, the survivors will have completed 2 to 3 generators by the time a good Trapper setup phase is finished. It is at this point that many inexperienced Trapper players will panic, as the survivors have completed more or less half of their primary objective, and the killer player has 0 hooks, maybe an injure or 2 from silly survivors running into you, and seemingly very little pressure on the opposing team. Playing Trapper is about walking a fine line between getting crushed and barely squeaking out a 4K. This long, seemingly fruitless setup phase causes Trapper's endgame to consist of gargantuan comebacks and extremely satisfying moments that make you go, oh yeah, it's all coming together. Be careful though. Losing hold of your 3-gen, misplacing your traps, or choosing a bad control area will lead to 4-man escapes with just a couple hooks. Now, back to our example. We now have around 1/3 of the map, containing 3 or 4 incomplete generators, rigged with traps. You may recall from the add-ons portion of this lecture that there are 2 types of traps, obstructive and surprise. A normal trapper setup has a combination of both, leaning either way depending on the map and tile generation. Obstructive traps are meant to make conventionally safe resources, primarily strong windows and pallets, unsafe to use. The strength of these traps is a direct positive correlation with the strength of the loop. This means an obstructive trap on a god pallet is much more effective than on a run-of-the-mill filler pallet, because survivors are more likely to run through the god pallet for safety, whether they plan to drop it or not. When trapping a pallet, always try to trap the spot survivors stand on when the pallet drop occurs, not in the middle of the pallet. I see this mistake way too often, and it gets punished with little to no effort on the survivor's part. Traps in the middle of pallets can be rendered entirely useless by the survivor dropping it instantly and vaulting over the pallet instead of running through it. By placing a trap just past the pallet, the survivor will still be caught when running through it, but the trap is also effective after the pallet is down. That was certainly a doozy, but fortunately, window traps are much harder to mess up. Simply place one on either side of the window, ideally the side with more grass to cover the trap, if applicable. The only thing to mention is that you can place a trap too close to a window, which will send fast vaulting survivors right over it. Just be sure to take half a step back from the window when you place it and you'll be fine. Prediction traps, or surprise traps, are very hard to teach, but I will do my best paired with showing a few of my personal favorites on screen. These are known as the high IQ traps that differentiate competent trappers from the gods. Prediction traps rely on the killer player's knowledge of survivor pathing, as well as awareness of how the map was generated, and finally, a read on how optimally the survivors will play. I've had far too many games go sour because the survivors were running loops poorly, causing them to avoid my surprise traps without even realizing it. Here are a few guidelines for what makes a good prediction trap. They are usually flush with walls or edges. All survivors with a basic understanding of looping know that hugging walls is crucial, so you never want to leave room between a trap and a wall for survivors to run through. This way, if a survivor somehow knows about the trap, they still have to go out of their way to avoid it. They are usually in the vicinity of a decent pallet or window. Traps in the open are never a good idea. If you're not trapping a pallet or window, you should be trapping the path that a good survivor will take to approach the pallet or window. They are always hidden. This should be pretty self-explanatory, but since a prediction trap is placed along a line rather than in a specific spot, your surprise traps should always be covered with naturally occurring debris or foliage. You can also opt to take the survivor perspective into account, such as trapping the top of a staircase or around a sharp corner. These are often less reliable and should only be used if they also obstruct a survivor's path to a part of the map. They should not be well known. The best surprises are, well, surprises. While you may learn your first few spots from your favorite trapper mains on YouTube and Twitch, don't be afraid to head into trial and experiment with new spots. You are sure to get a feel for what works, what doesn't, and absolutely increase your trapper IQ. I've spent so much time talking about the types of traps that most of you probably forgot I was talking about the trapper's playstyle. In our hypothetical trapper match, we now have an even split of obstructive and prediction traps, spanning just the area around the final few generators. So, how do I start a successful snowball, you ask? Well, that's the easy part. All you have to do is patrol the incomplete generators in the area and push survivors off of them. If the survivors run to loops you have trapped, continue the chase until you hear the telltale bear trap snap. Pick up, hook, and then repeat. If the survivors are able to avoid your traps, it is often optimal to hit them once and then return to patrolling your generators. as they are likely to lead you away from your control area to buy time for their teammates. As you gain hooks or downs, all of the survivors will be pressured to leave their generators to help the team, being forced to run through your minefield of expertly tailored traps. By this point, if your setup phase has been well executed, most teams have already succumbed to the trapper's vicious cycle, waiting to be put out of their misery. Every trapper should strive to use the setup playstyle, but sometimes the survivors do not give you the time to prepare. Some survivors will follow you around and disarm each trap you place, starting from the very first minute. This is where the chase trapper comes into play. Since you cannot set surprise traps while the survivors are watching, it is only worth setting obstructive ones. There is a trick that trapper players can use while chasing these survivors. When you think the survivor is going to throw a pallet and stun you, you can begin setting a trap instead of getting stunned or respecting it. For strong pallets, the killer may finish setting the trap, while for weaker pallets the action can be cancelled. Besides this, chases must be played normally and are typically when trapper is at his weakest. I'll be brutally honest here. I'm going to dump the cold water on the back of your head and show you how the sausage is made. Trapper is far from the best killer in the game. However, an efficient setup phase with a little luck can lead to some unrivaled satisfying moments. The trapper is a poor fit for many Dead by Daylight players due to the preparation aspect, as well as him being a weak killer even when played at his very best. I recommend everyone give Evan MacMillan a try, but I've gotta give the trapper 1 monkey out of 5.